The stagecoach kicked up dust as it rumbled toward Miller's Creek, and 30-year-old Tabitha Keller gripped her worn leather valise with white knuckles. Knowing that yet another mail-order bride gathering awaited her at journey's end, likely her last chance at finding a husband in the vast Wyoming territory of 1878. "We'll be arriving shortly, madam," the driver called down, his voice barely audible over the thunder of hooves and creak of wooden wheels against the rugged terrain. Tabitha nodded, though no one could see her acknowledgement. The other passengers, a young mother with her infant child and an elderly gentleman who'd slept most of the journey, paid her little mind. She was used to being overlooked. At 30, with no husband or children to show for her years, she had become accustomed to the pitying glances and whispered comments about her unfortunate status. 6 years ago, after her parents' passing, Tabitha had left behind her life as a schoolteacher in Boston. The promise of a new beginning in the West had drawn her, like so many others, to answer advertisements seeking women willing to marry frontier men. Yet each gathering had ended the same younger, prettier women chosen, while she remained standing alone. As the stagecoach pulled into Miller's Creek, Tabitha's heart sank at the sight of the train station. A crowd had already gathered, men in their Sunday best waiting to meet the potential brides arriving on today's train, and women of varying ages nervously preparing to be presented. This was her 7th such gathering and likely her last. Her savings were dwindling, her hope fading faster than daylight in winter. "Here we are, folks. Miller's Creek Station," announced the driver as he pulled the team to a halt. The small frontier town buzzed with unusual activity. The monthly arrival of potential brides always created a stir. Merchants hawked their wares, children ran between the wooden boardwalks, and local women eyed the newcomers with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. As Tabitha descended from the coach, her plain brown traveling dress dusty from the journey, she glanced toward the station platform where Mrs. Haversham, the town's self-appointed matchmaker, was already organizing the women in a line. Most appeared to be in their late teens or early 20s, their faces bright with hope and anticipation. "Ah, Miss Keller, you've returned," Mrs. Haversham said, her voice carrying a note of surprise. "I hadn't expected to see you again after Laramie. I still have hopes, Mrs. Haversham," Tabitha replied, lifting her chin slightly. The older woman's expression softened with pity. "Of course, dear, take your place at the end of the line." Tabitha positioned herself behind a pretty blonde who couldn't have been more than 19. The girl's golden curls bounced as she nervously fidgeted, glancing occasionally at Tabitha with undisguised curiosity. "Is this your first gathering?" Tabitha asked kindly. The girl nodded. "Yes, madam, I'm Lily from Chicago. You'll do fine," Tabitha assured her. "The men here are generally decent sorts." Before Lily could respond, the station master blew his whistle, signaling the train's approach. The crowd's energy intensified as the locomotive came into view, its black smoke billowing against the clear blue sky. Tabitha watched as the train pulled to a stop, metal screeching against metal. The doors opened, and more women disembarked, most looking weary but hopeful. They were quickly ushered into line by Mrs. Haversham's efficient assistants. As the gathering officially began, Tabitha observed the ritual she knew too well. Mrs. Haversham made a speech about the importance of marriage in taming the wild frontier. The men were introduced by profession and property holdings, and then the selection process began. One by one, men stepped forward to speak with women who caught their eye. Young Lily was approached almost immediately by a shopkeeper who appeared kind, if somewhat dull. Other matches formed quickly, with nervous laughter and formal introductions filling the air. An hour passed, and Tabitha remained alone, just as she had at 6 gatherings before. She maintained her dignified posture, though her feet ached and her heart grew heavier with each passing minute. The crowd had thinned considerably when she noticed a tall figure dismounting from a dusty palomino at the edge of the station. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, his broad-shouldered frame casting a long shadow across the platform. As he approached, Tabitha could see he was perhaps in his mid-30s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. Unlike the other men in their stiff Sunday suits, he wore practical riding clothes, dark trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a weathered leather vest. His only concession to formality appeared to be that his clothes were reasonably clean. Mrs. Havisham intercepted him with a frown. "Mr. Ironwood, you're late as usual." "Had a situation with the south pasture fence, madam," he replied, his voice deep and unhurried. "Couldn't be helped." Tabitha couldn't help but notice his hands strong and calloused, bearing the marks of honest labor. As Mrs. Havisham continued to chastise him for his tardiness, his gaze drifted over the remaining women and settled on Tabitha. For a moment their eyes locked, and Tabitha felt a strange flutter in her chest. She quickly looked away, reminding herself not to entertain foolish hopes. Men like him, handsome, confident ranchers, always chose the young, pretty ones. Well, there's hardly anyone left to choose from, Mr. Ironwood, Mrs. Havisham was saying. "Perhaps you should return next month when the train brings new prospects." The man, Mr. Ironwood, seemed to consider this suggestion for a moment before shaking his head. "I reckon I'll have a look at who's here now if it's all the same to you." To Tabitha's surprise, he walked directly toward her, removing his hat as he approached. Up close, she could see the silver threads beginning to appear at his temples and the fine lines around his eyes that crinkled when he smiled. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice carrying a gentle southern drawl. "Name's Reese Ironwood. I've got a ranch about 10 miles west of town." Tabitha felt her throat go dry. "Tabitha Keller," she managed. "Formerly of Boston. Boston's a long way from Wyoming," he observed. "What brings you all this way, Miss Keller?" She considered giving him the polite, practiced answer she'd offered at previous gatherings, but something in his direct gaze encouraged honesty. "A new beginning, Mr. Ironwood, and please call me Tabitha." "Tabitha," he repeated, as if testing the name. "And I'm Reese. Would you mind if we spoke for a bit?" She nodded, acutely aware of Mrs. Havisham watching with undisguised interest and the few remaining townspeople who had turned to observe this unexpected development. Reese guided her to a bench at the edge of the platform, a respectful distance from the others but still in public view. "I should tell you straight away," he began. "I'm not looking for what most of these men want." Tabitha's heart sank. Of course he wasn't interested in marriage. Perhaps he merely wanted a housekeeper or a cook for his ranch. "What I mean is," he continued, noting her expression, "I don't need a pretty young thing who can't tell a branding iron from a fire poker. I need a partner." "A partner?" Tabitha echoed. "Yes, madam. I've got 200 acres, 60 head of cattle, and a decent house I built myself. What I don't have is someone to share it with, someone with sense and strength." His gray eyes studied her face. "You've got both, I'd wager." Tabitha felt warmth creep into her cheeks. "You can't possibly know that, Mr. Ironwood. We've only just met." "Reese," he corrected gently. "And I know enough. You've come to these gatherings before," she nodded reluctantly. "This is my 7th. Instead of the pity she expected, respect flickered in his eyes. "Takes courage to keep trying. Most would have given up." "Perhaps I'm simply stubborn," she replied with a small smile. He laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made several heads turn. "Stubborn's good. Wyoming winters require stubborn." For the next hour, they talked as the station emptied around them. Reese told her about his ranch, how he'd built it from nothing over the past decade after coming west from Georgia following the war. Tabitha shared her experiences as a schoolteacher and her journey west after losing her parents. "I've always loved learning," she admitted. "Books were my closest companions growing up." "Got a fair collection myself," Reese said. "Not much else to do during blizzards." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the platform, Mrs. Havisham approached them. "The boarding house is preparing dinner, Miss Keller, and Mr. Ironwood, I'm sure your ranch needs tending." Reese stood, offering his hand to help Tabitha rise. "Mrs. Haversham, I'd like to call on Miss Keller tomorrow, if that's acceptable." The matchmaker's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Well, Yes, of course. Miss Keller will be staying at the Peterson boarding house." "Until tomorrow, then," Reese said to Tabitha, his hand still holding hers, in front of the remaining townsfolk. Mrs. Haversham and the station master, Reese lifted Tabitha's hand to his lips and placed a gentle kiss upon it. The gesture, so unexpected and public, sent a wave of whispers through the onlookers. "Until tomorrow," Tabitha replied, her voice steadier than she felt. As she watched him mount his horse and ride away, Tabitha realized that for the first time since arriving in the West, she was genuinely looking forward to the next day. True to his word, Reese arrived at the boarding house promptly at 10 the next morning. He had exchanged his work clothes for a clean shirt and jacket, though he still wore his practical boots and hat. "I thought you might enjoy seeing a bit more of Miller's Creek," he suggested as they walked down the main street. "It's not Boston, but it has its charms." Tabitha appreciated his thoughtfulness. Most men at these gatherings rushed straight to proposals, eager to secure a wife before returning to their lonely homesteads. Reese's approach was refreshingly different. They visited the general store, where he introduced her to Mr. Willoughby, the proprietor who had known Reese for years. "This man's credit is always good here," Willoughby told her with a wink. "Honest as the day is long." Next came the small library, which occupied one room of the schoolhouse. Tabitha's eyes lit up at the sight of the modest collection. "Oh, this is wonderful," she exclaimed, running her fingers along the spines of several novels. "Thought you might like it," Reese said, watching her with evident pleasure. "The teacher, Miss Collins, orders new books whenever she can. Town folk donate what they've finished reading." "I brought several books with me from Boston," Tabitha said. "Perhaps I could contribute them." "I'm sure Miss Collins would appreciate that." As they continued their tour, Tabitha noticed the curious glances from townspeople. Word had clearly spread about Reese's public gesture at the station. "People are staring," she murmured as they passed the barbershop. Reese shrugged. "Small towns run on gossip. They're just surprised to see me in town 2 days running. I usually only come in for supplies once a month. And for bride gatherings." She asked, unable to keep a hint of challenge from her voice. He stopped walking and turned to face her. "This was my first, Tabitha. But Mrs. Haversham seemed to know you well. She's been trying to get me to attend for years. Yesterday I finally gave in, mostly to stop her pestering." His expression grew serious. "I wasn't looking for just any wife, but when I saw you standing there, so dignified despite being overlooked, something told me you were worth meeting." Tabitha felt her defenses weakening. "You could have chosen any of those younger women." "I didn't want a girl. I wanted a woman who knows her own mind." He offered his arm again. "Now, shall we continue? I've arranged for lunch at the hotel restaurant." Over a simple but well-prepared meal of beef stew and fresh bread, their conversation deepened. Tabitha told him about her dreams of potentially starting a small school on her own someday, while Reese shared his hopes of expanding his cattle operation. "I've been thinking about breeding horses as well," he admitted. "There's good money in it, and I've always had a way with them." "You seem to have built quite a life here," Tabitha observed. "A half-life," he corrected. "A ranch needs a family to truly come alive." By the time he escorted her back to the boarding house in the late afternoon, Tabitha found herself genuinely drawn to this thoughtful, straightforward man. Unlike others she'd met, he asked questions and actually listened to her answers. He valued her opinions and didn't seem intimidated by her education or independent spirit. "May I call on you again tomorrow?" he asked as they stood on the boarding house porch. "I would like that," she replied honestly. For the next week, they fell into a pleasant routine. Each day, Reese would arrive in town, and they would spend hours together walking, talking, and gradually learning the contours of each other's lives and characters. He showed her the countryside surrounding Miller's Creek, took her fishing at a nearby stream, and introduced her to various townspeople who clearly respected him. On the 5th day, he brought her to his ranch. The main house was indeed well built, as he'd claimed a solid two-story structure with a wide porch and ample windows. Inside, she found it clean but decidedly masculine, lacking the touches that would make it truly comfortable. "It's a fine home," she told him sincerely as he showed her through the rooms. "It could use a woman's touch," he admitted, "but it's sturdy and warm in winter." The tour concluded in his study, where floor-to-ceiling bookshelves housed an impressive collection. Tabitha ran her fingers along the spines, noting classics of literature alongside practical guides to ranching and farming. "You weren't exaggerating about your library," she said with genuine admiration. "Books keep a man sane during long winters," he replied, watching her with an intensity that made her heart quicken. After showing her the barn and introducing her to his favorite horses, they sat on the porch with glasses of cool lemonade, looking out over the rolling pastures where his cattle grazed. "It's beautiful here," Tabitha said, breathing in the clean air scented with wildflowers and grass. "It can be hard too," Reese cautioned. "Winters are brutal, summers can bring drought, it's not an easy life." "Few worthwhile things are easy," she replied. He studied her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected, Tabitha Keller." "What did you expect?" "I'm not rightly sure." "But you're stronger, smarter, and more interesting than any woman I've met in a long while." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. Here was a man who truly saw her not as a last resort or a convenient housekeeper, but as a person of value. On the 7th day after their meeting at the station, Reese took her to a high meadow overlooking his property. They spread a blanket beneath a solitary oak tree and shared a picnic of cold chicken, bread, and fresh berries. "In all our conversations," Reese began as they finished their meal, "we've talked about many things, but not about what brought you to these bride gatherings." Tabitha gazed out over the landscape, gathering her thoughts. "After my parents died, there was little left for me in Boston. My position at the school was secure, but empty. I wanted more a family of my own, perhaps. The advertisements made the West sound full of opportunity. And has it been? Until recently, no," she admitted. "Each gathering was more disheartening than the last. Men would look right through me to the younger women. I began to believe I was simply too old, too plain, too educated for frontier life." Reese's brow furrowed. "Those men were fools. Perhaps they just knew what they wanted and it wasn't me." "Then they didn't know what they needed," he countered. He shifted to face her more directly. "Tabitha, I've enjoyed these days with you more than I can say. You've brought something to my life that I didn't even know was missing." Tabitha felt her pulse quicken. "I've enjoyed them too." "The thing is," he continued, his voice growing more serious, "the train leaves tomorrow, and I find myself unable to bear the thought of you being on it." "Reese, I know it's fast," he interrupted, taking her hand in his. "Too fast, maybe. But I've lived long enough to recognize something rare when I find it." He took a deep breath. "I'm asking if you'd consider staying, not as my housekeeper or cook, but as my wife." Tabitha felt tears spring to her eyes. "You hardly know me." "I know enough," he insisted. "I know you're kind and intelligent. I know you face challenges with courage. I know talking with you is as easy as breathing." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "And I know that when I took your hand at that station, something changed for me. For me as well," she whispered. "I'm not offering romance from storybooks," he continued. "I'm offering partnership, respect, and a life built together. I think in time, love will grow from that foundation, a deeper love than most ever know." Tabitha studied his face, seeing the earnestness in his gray eyes. For years, she had dreamed of a proposal, imagined how it might feel. None of her imaginings had prepared her for this moment, sitting in a wildflower meadow with a man who valued her mind as much as her potential as a wife. "Yes," she said simply, joy spread across Reese's face. "Yes. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll marry you." He raised her hand to his lips, just as he had that first day at the station, but this time he followed it by leaning forward to place a gentle kiss on her lips there first. It was brief but held the promise of deeper passion to come. "When?" he asked as they broke apart, "Soon," she replied. "I see no reason to wait." They were married 3 days later in Miller's Creek's small church with many curious townspeople in attendance. Mrs. Haversham took particular pride in the match, despite having had little to do with it beyond organizing the gathering where they met. "I always knew Mr. Ironwood would make an excellent husband when he finally chose a bride," she told anyone who would listen. Tabitha wore a simple blue dress that Reese had purchased from the general store, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. He stood tall and proud in a new black suit, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the formal attire, but determined to honor the occasion properly. Their vows were straightforward and heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Reese surprised everyone, including Tabitha, by sweeping her into his arms for a kiss that left no doubt about his feelings. The townspeople cheered, perhaps as much from shock as celebration. Reese Ironwood had always been respected in Miller's Creek, but he had also been known as a solitary, serious man. This public display of affection revealed a different side to him that few had glimpsed. After a small reception at the hotel, where well-wishers offered congratulations and advice in equal measure, Reese helped Tabitha into his wagon for the journey to what was now their home. As they left town, Tabitha looked back at the train station where they had met just 10 days earlier. "It seems impossible that so much could change in such a short time," she mused. Reese reached over to squeeze her hand. "Life out here moves at its own pace, sometimes slow as molasses, sometimes quick as lightning." The transition to married life brought challenges, as Reese had honestly warned. Tabitha had to learn the rhythms of ranch life: early mornings, the constant chores, and the isolation that came with living miles from town. Yet she approached each task with determination, just as she had faced those bride gatherings after repeated disappointments. Reese proved to be a patient teacher and a considerate husband. He never criticized her mistakes, whether it was oversalted stew or a poorly mended shirt. Instead, he appreciated her willingness to learn and adapt. Their evenings became precious time together. After the day's work was done, they would often sit in his study, now theirs, reading aloud to each other or discussing ideas from his books. Sometimes they simply sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in spectacular colors. Physical intimacy developed gradually between them. Reese never pushed, seemingly content to let Tabitha set the pace of their growing closeness. When they finally came together as husband and wife in the full sense, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "I never thought I'd find this," she whispered afterward, her head resting on his chest. "Find what?" he asked, stroking her hair. "A man who would see me, truly see me, and want me anyway." Reese gently tilted her face up to meet his gaze. "Not anyway, Tabitha, because of who you are. Your strength, your mind, your heart, those are what draw me to you." As summer turned to fall and fall gave way to winter, their bond deepened. The harsh Wyoming winter that Reese had warned about indeed arrived with ferocious intensity, but the isolation it brought only served to strengthen their connection. Snowbound for days at a time, they learned the contours of each other's minds and bodies, forming a partnership that encompassed all aspects of their lives. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and bringing new life to the land, Tabitha had news of her own. "Reese," she said one evening as they sat by the fire, "I believe we'll need to prepare a nursery before next winter." His eyes widened as her meaning became clear. "A baby, you're certain?" She nodded, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. "The signs are all there. I think we'll welcome our child around November." Joy transformed his features as he knelt before her chair, placing his hand over hers. "A family," he whispered. "A true family." Their daughter, Eleanor, was born on a cold November night with the assistance of a midwife from town. She had her father's gray eyes and her mother's determined spirit, evident from her first powerful cries. As Tabitha held their child, with Reese's arm around them both, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 6 failed bride gatherings had led to the 7th, where a late-arriving rancher had changed her life by simply seeing value where others had not. "What are you thinking?" Reese asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about that day at the station," she replied. "How close I came to giving up." "I'm grateful you didn't," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "As am I." She looked down at their daughter, then back up at her husband. "Who would have thought that being passed over so many times would lead me exactly where I needed to be?" In the years that followed, the Ironwood Ranch flourished, as did their family. Eleanor was joined by 2 brothers, James and William, and the house that had once seemed too empty became filled with laughter, learning, and love. True to her original dream, Tabitha eventually started a small school in their home, teaching not only their children but those from neighboring ranches who would otherwise have had no access to education. Reese expanded his operation to include horse breeding, with his carefully raised stock becoming known throughout the territory for their quality and temperament. On their 10th anniversary, Reese surprised Tabitha with a special gift and expansion to their library, with shelves reaching to the ceiling and a collection of new books he had ordered from as far away as New York and San Francisco. "For the woman who brings wisdom and warmth to our home," he said as he showed her the newly completed room. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Tabitha reflected on how differently her life might have turned out. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't arrived late to that gathering?" she asked. Reese considered the question. "I believe some things are meant to be one way or another, if not that day, perhaps another." "That's rather romantic thinking for a practical rancher," she teased. He laughed, the sound still as warm and genuine as it had been that first day. "10 years with you has taught me that the heart and the head can work together. Practicality doesn't preclude romance." As if to prove his point, he leaned over to kiss her, his touch still igniting the same spark it had when they were newly wed. Later, watching their children play in the yard before bedtime, Tabitha felt a profound gratitude for the path her life had taken. At 40, she had everything she had once feared would pass her by: a loving husband, beautiful children, and meaningful work that used her gifts. "No regrets?" Reese asked, seeming to read her thoughts as he often could now. "Not one," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Being too old brought me to the perfect time, the perfect place, and the perfect man who took my hand when others would not." "Best decision I ever made," he said simply, his arm tightening around her as the Wyoming sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. A fitting backdrop to a love that had been unexpected but had proven more enduring than either could have imagined on that fateful day at Miller's Creek Station.